Hello everyone and welcome to Merryvale Vineyards. My name is Andrew Wright. I'm the winemaker of Merryvale alongside Jeff Crawford, winemaker for Starmont. And we are here today to talk a little bit about our new releases of 2019 single vineyard Pinots. So pretty exciting. I love single vineyard Pinots. Jeff, you've been making single vineyard Pinots in Carneros for a long time. So I know you're excited too. So let's talk a little bit about the difference, why we make two single vineyard Pinots. And that is because even though Carneros, being the coolest climate of Napa down there by the northern part of the San Pablo Bay, is one region, is very diverse in terms of soils and also climate. So we have our Stanley Ranch Estate vineyard, a little bit closer to the water, a little bit cooler. Brown Ranch, what they're calling the banana belt, I like to use that term. A little bit North Carneros, a little bit warmer, so kind of a little bit riper style, but not necessarily as ripe as we would typically think of a New World Pinot. I feel like I'm rambling, so I'm going to start drinking and tasting, I should say. So, Jeff, what are your thoughts on the 2019 vintage as a whole? I'm just curious.
2019 I thought was a great vintage overall, very balanced, kind of reminiscent of 2018, which up until that point was one of my favorite vintages in recent years. Very elegant, but at the same time there was some depth and power to the wines overall and across the board.
Yeah.
I think that 19 is pretty similar in that. Little more power, but overall, I think it was another back-to-back beautiful vintage.
Yeah. No, for sure. I thought initially 18 was going to be more powerful, and it seems like 19 has, if not the power of 18, certainly maybe a little bit more, but like still super fine refinement. And I love that in Pinot, especially down in Carneros, where you have a year where it's an even growing season. There's no sort of rain pressure, mildew pressure, heat spikes. It requires you to take all the fruit off in one go. So the 2019 to me is a harvest in which everything was pretty even, no drama really. So, that's what you want as a winemaker. And so what we have here is two different vineyards in a really great year where we can let the vineyards really be different vineyards. So in terms of treatment, the Stanley Ranch Estate, again, closer to the bay, we use a little bit more whole cluster. This is about 15 to 20% whole cluster fermentation in there. And by that I mean we've just thrown in, by weight, about 20% of those grapes that go into the tank are just not destemmed. They just are the whole cluster that goes into the tanks. It ferments. Native yeast, sustainably farmed, as you know. You've been making wine off of that ranch.
So what
for a
does
long
the
time.
addition of those stems, would you say, kind of add to the wine? What can people expect from that what's your goal with using that whole cluster?
Better narrative. I also find that I really like it changes the wine's complexion from being just pure fruit to have a little bit more depth of character, maybe a little bit more tertiary notes while the wine is younger. I also find, and there's some studies recently that have indicated that these wines that have some stem inclusion are more, the antioxidative properties of stems and those tannins tends to let the wines age better. I mean, that's still a little bit to be determined, but I do have to say that I really like, if you include really nice green stems that are fresh, it really kind of, I think, boosts the freshness, not to sound too remedial, but it definitely lifts the wines a little bit. I perceive minerality a little bit more, and it just, to me, gives it a different dimension of complexity.
Extra layer. That's kind of how I think of it. The Stanley Ranch fruit on its own, wonderful wines, as you mentioned. I used to make a 100% destemmed version of the Stanley Ranch. I eventually ended up starting to experiment with the little stems for exactly that reason, and also potentially a little longevity in the bottle too,
For sure.
which is one of the things that kind of intrigued me about using the whole cluster as well. But great usage, because with the stem inclusion, I feel like you have to be careful to make sure that it doesn't go overboard.
Totally.
Just like with the use of new oak, which
sure.
there's some on here, I assume, but in moderation, it adds layers of complexity.
Completely.
Done too much, and it just overpowers the
Totally.
wine and becomes singular in that point.
Right.
And I think you did a wonderful job of kind of getting that balance of adding the complexity, but not going too far. So
For sure.
beautiful
Awesome.
wine.
Yeah, thank you. And to your point about the new oak barrels, it's about 30% new oak in both of these wines. So just to give it a little bit of like almost like a baking spice characteristic in the background, more of like a background note. What's really important in these wines, and you know, you've made Pinot for a long time, I'm sure you agree, is having like a really nice kind of focused acidity to the wines. To me, I don't want to make an overripe Pinot. Pinot in the New World tends to be riper than in Burgundy, just coming out of the gate, just based on where we are in terms of longitude in the world. So we have more sunlight; the grapes tend to get riper. So I'm always looking to maybe be a little bit on the early side in terms of domestic picking when people typically pick Pinot, because I really love the freshness and kind of the tertiary notes and the complexity, again, as we talked about. And those are, again, like I'm drawn to really great French Pinots, and so those are the kind of wines I like to make. So to me, Stanley Ranch Estate is kind of like our take on that kind of Grand Cru Burgundy style. And then with Brown Ranch, qualitatively, I think they're at the same level of quality. Stylistically, a little bit different, though. I mean, this is, to me, a prototypical New World Pinot, and I mean that in the best way possible, where you have, like, whereas this one is more Rainier cherry, I feel like this one is more black cherry, cola, the prototypical Carneros kind of flavor profile. This is all 100% whole berries, so completely destemmed. Native yeast ferment, again, because we're pretty old school that way. But it's a really nice side-by-side, I feel like. Still great acid, but definitely a little bit riper in stylistically than the Stanley.
And one of the things that I always found between the two vineyards side by side is that not only just the different kind of fruit character, that kind of darker fruit, that Mission Fig stuff that you were talking about going on in the Brown Ranch, but also bigger on the palate too. I mean, it's certainly still a Pinot, but
Right.
this is side by side. A little more tannins, still very refined and velvety tannins, but at the same time, just kind of gives it a little bit more structure,
Yeah.
and maybe even a bit more concentration. To your point about
Agree.
the kind of New World Pinot style. And one of the things that I always loved about this is, as you mentioned about Carneros and the diversity, the idea that these two vineyards are 3 miles as the crow flies apart from each other,
It's
and
pretty incredible.
and you can get such differences between the two wines with a pretty similar approach to the winemaking in the cellar, if I'm not mistaken.
Completely. So the only real difference in the cellar is this one, the Brown Ranch does not have any whole cluster. But again, with the Stanley, it's such a small amount. It's pretty much apples to apples in terms of, like treatment in the cellar. So I really love making wines where you can see the differences in the vineyard and in the fruit that it comes in. I know you do too.
Yeah.
So big fan, again, of the 2019 vintage as a whole. It really allowed for even picking, even ripening, allowed us to really kind of stylistically make these wines in the ways the vineyard wanted to make them, not necessarily the way we wanted to make them. So I really love that. Again, to me, the Stanley has a lot of the power, all the Pinot, but more tertiary notes, a little bit more kind of French in style. And the Brown is just like a prototypical great example of Carneros Pinot. So, yeah.
And we're talking about these wines because we got some deals that will be coming up. So get on the website, merryvale.com, and check it out and pick some up for yourself. Taste them side by side. I highly recommend opening both bottles.
I've had a great time so far, and I will continue after we're done with this video.
So follow us and do the same.
Yep.
Get some bottles and have some fun.
Cheers.
All right. Cheers.